Chapter 1166. Its Name. Lightning once again lit up the desolate moors that were blanketed with grayish-yellow fog. It illuminated the spot where an angel-level battle had just happened, illuminating the calm smile on his face. Eamon looked at him for a few seconds before nudging his monocle and smiling.
"Can't you say something else? You seem to have found new hope."
Klein's smile didn't change as he clenched his fist to his nose and stuck one hand into his pocket.
I just suddenly understood something. It turns out that it's not too demoralizing to play this game with your true body. On the contrary, this shows that you have no way of stealing my destiny.
Oh. Eamon smiled as he spoke in a tone as though he was looking forward to what Klein would say next. Klein laughed and said without any hesitation,
Otherwise, once I entered the forsaken land of the gods, you would have directly stolen my destiny and become the new owner of Sapphire Castle. Even if you want to play a game of escaping and obstructing, you could have waited until the main goal was achieved before doing so. That way, you wouldn't be taking any risks. And having lost my chance to resurrect in my original destiny, I'll put in an even greater effort into escaping due to my instinct to survive. Indeed, the god of mischief might do something that disregards danger, doing so in pursuit of excitement, but you're still the god of deceit.
Having said that, Klein looked at the unperturbed expression on Eamon's face and paused.
I know that you really have the ability to steal the destinies of others, but being capable of doing something doesn't mean that you'll do it. This requires a risk assessment, as well as weighing and analyzing the pros and cons. I believe that you don't wish to steal my destiny directly. That will make you bear the burden of everything brought about by Sapphire Castle. You have to resist the trauma of the resurrection of its original owner. Even for a king of angels like you, this is also very dangerous. If you aren't careful, you can perish. Therefore, you want to find a loophole. You want to get Sapphire Castle without suffering the negative effects, and this requires my permission.
When he said that, Klein thought of the experience of getting hit by computer viruses in his previous life. Those viruses would always pretend to be normal and cheat him into giving him permission. This was somewhat similar to the current situation. After hearing Klein's words, Eamon looked at him without a word. Instead, he calmly adjusted the crystal monocle. Klein smiled and continued.
From the moment you parasitized me, you've been setting up a huge scam. On the one hand, you've given me the option of becoming your blessed, telling me that your true body can withstand my destiny, causing me to bear a heavy psychological burden. In the subsequent journey, you constantly made me see hope before destroying it. From time to time, you'll give me a time limit, making me unknowingly seize an opportunity and catch my breath. Then, you suddenly shorten the trip, disrupting my plans. Finally, you reveal the card that you're the true body, sending me into the abyss of despair so as to destroy my will and dismantle my mental defenses. I would completely break down and choose to become your blessed and agree to that hidden transaction.
After hearing everything in silence, Eamon suddenly laughed and raised his hands to gently clap.
Perfect deduction. However, you seem to have missed a problem. What I said was to see my real body at a sufficiently safe place. Then, your destiny will be taken away. Now that we haven't reached our final destination, I naturally won't take the risk.
Klein's expression sank slightly before he relaxed again.
I'm looking forward to how different the developments will be there.
He responded to Eamon in his style. The genuine king of angels adjusted his monocle and pointed to the side with a smile.
Soon. We'll arrive in less than half a day.
How long is that exactly?
Klein instinctively lacked trust in Eamon's vague descriptions. Eamon scratched his chin and chuckled.
Half an hour.
Klein turned his head to look in the direction where Eamon had pointed. He only saw deep darkness, nothing else. A bolt of lightning streaked across the desolate moors, but even farther away was a thick, grayish-yellow fog. Backland, Empress Borough, in the Hall family's luxurious villa. After 2 days of chaos, Audrey's life finally regained some peace. This made her even more curious about the truth behind the king's assassination. Considering how Mr. Fool had seemingly hinted that the tarot gathering would be canceled today, Audrey decided to pray to this existence in advance. and establish a connection with the World Gehrman sparrow to figure out the corresponding situation. The moment she glanced at Susie, the golden retriever immediately walked out of the room, closed the door with her leg in passing, and sat outside. Audrey sat down, took on a prayer pose, and recited an ancient Hermes.
The fool that doesn't belong to this era.
Backland Eastborough, inside a 2-bedroom rental apartment.
Do you think there will be a gathering today? There's no formal notice.
Fours took out her pocket watch for women and opened it. Mass. Jo shook her head.
I don't know.
Fours couldn't sit still any longer. She left her seat and paced back and forth anxiously as she muttered to herself.
Mr. World didn't respond. Neither did Mr. Fool respond.
As she spoke, Fours suddenly looked at her friend who was eating some ham. She hurriedly said,
Shio, why don't you try praying to Mr. Fool and ask if the gathering will be held as scheduled today?
Shio frowned slightly as she put down her fork and nodded.
Okay.
She also found the situation a little strange. She clasped her hands and held them under her chin. Jo took a deep breath and said in a low voice,
The fool that doesn't belong to this era.
Backland, Northborough, underground of St. Samuel Cathedral, in a room behind Chanis Gate. Emlyn White woke up, feeling puzzled over the dream he had. He had apparently dreamed of the sanguine ancestor Lilith. In his dream, he was trapped in a castle covered in red grapevines, one he couldn't escape from no matter how hard he tried. Later, through a narrow window from high above, he saw the crimson moon outside and a pair of bat wings that covered half the crimson moon. In the legends of the Sanguine, this was one of the symbols of the ancient goddess, Lilith. Right on the heels of that, Emlyn flew up high in excitement, attempting to open the narrow window. At the bottom of the glass, he found a tarot card. On the surface of the tarot card was a lad dressed in gorgeous clothes. He was wearing splendid headgear with a stick over his shoulder. There was a bindle hanging on the end of the stick, and a puppy was following behind him. The Fool card. At this point in his dream, Emlyn naturally woke up. As a sanguine viscount, he had the ability to perform a basic analysis of dreams.
It must be because of my current situation that this dream appeared. That star actually didn't deliver any human blood to me. I am indeed the target of the ancestor's benediction. She is hinting to me that if I wish to escape from my predicament, I have to obtain help from Mr. Fool? What day is it today? Forget it, I'll just pray. That way, I can leave as soon as possible.
Emlyn sat up with hope as he piously chanted,
The fool that doesn't belong to this era.
Above the gray fog, the 3 crimson stars that corresponded to justice, judgment, and the moon began to expand and shrink, emitting light to create ripples. They merged into the dark red tide that originally existed, causing the shock waves in the mysterious space to instantly intensify. Amidst the quake, the tide flooded the ancient and majestic palace, lighting up one mysterious symbol after another behind the 8 seats on the long bronze table. This brought a new halo and resonance, accompanied by a buzzing sound. At the end of the long, mottled table, the back of the Fool's seat lit up as well. The complicated symbol formed by the contorted lines and pupilless eye kept extending outwards, becoming layered and extremely three-dimensional. The dark red tide was attracted over and formed a figure on the high-backed chair belonging to the Fool. This figure wasn't stable enough. It distorted and scattered from time to time, hardly capable of maintaining its form. On a desolate moor covered with grayish-yellow fog, Klein paused for a moment and looked up at the lightning that streaked across the sky. He then retracted his gaze. Holding the lantern in his hand, he followed beside Aemon, deep into the endless moors. The more the man and the king of angels proceeded, the more ravines the ground had. Similarly, their depths became more and more exaggerated. About 10 minutes later, another bolt of lightning streaked across the sky. Not far away, Klein saw a single-eyed giant with a bluish-black pupil, pacing back and forth. It towered tens of meters. His body was covered in traces of rotting pus. His eye was sunken and lifeless. It was obvious that he was dead. However, he continued wandering around. Grayish-yellow gas emanated from his body, interweaving in midair to create the fog over the moor. The grayish-yellow fog that enveloped the vast moor was actually generated by this bluish-black giant.
The youngest son of the giant king Ormir, the god of glory, Bladel. He publicly cursed my father and was punished to forever roam this area. Of course, he has long died in the cataclysm, but he still wasn't able to free himself.
Eamon looked at the giant and smiled.
If I hadn't stolen the corresponding damage dealt to you, you would have been contaminated by the fog created after Bladel's death. You would become a cursed entity that roams this area.
Do I have to thank you?
Suddenly, Klein felt like he had entered a myth. With him in tow, Eamon continued forward. Soon, they approached the bluish-black, single-eyed giant. There was an extremely deep ravine on the spot where the giant was loitering about. As the lightning flashed, a thick and vast grayish-white building appeared at the bottom. With just a glance, Klein's eyelids twitched slightly as he recalled the scene he saw when he was divining the unshadowed crucifix. If he remembered correctly, this should be where the ancient sun god, the City of Silver's creator, Aemon and Adam's father walked out from.
Is this the safe place that Aemon mentioned?
Klein's heart sank. At this moment, the pointy-hatted, monocled Aemon walked to the edge of the ravine. With his back facing the grayish-white building, he spread his arms slightly and said with a smile,
This is the Holy Land where my father was awoken. Buried in it is the history I wish to seek. My father told me that this place has an ancient name, called.
As a streak of silver lightning tore through the sky, the black-robed Aemon paused as he widened his arms, saying with a solemn tone,
Chernobyl!
Chapter 1167, When the Stars Are Right.
Chernobyl!
Upon hearing Aemon's words, Klein's first reaction was one of shock. Back when they were approaching the bluish-black, single-eyed giant, he had come up with many possibilities, but he never expected to hear such a name. This was akin to seeing a machine gun appear in an ancient oil painting, or a novel's plot appearing in a scientific paper. It was filled with unbelievable contradictions. In the next second, he thought of the funny matter about how the ancient sun god had used his rib to create Dark Angel Sasrir, but had named his eldest son Adam. He instinctively believed that the current situation was similar, and he couldn't help but laugh. To have Aemon, who was so powerful that he was almost a bug in the real world, a king of angels who always wore a sinister smile on his face, speak the name with such seriousness and solemnity, it made Klein unable to hold back his laughter. Besides, he had no intention of controlling himself.
It's best if he gets angry from the embarrassment and kills me.
The reason Aemon is this way today has largely to do with the ancient sun god's method of upbringing. The corners of Klein's mouth curved into a smile, prepared to ruthlessly vent his inner laughter. At this moment, another bolt of silvery white lightning streaked across the sky, illuminating the deep ravine. It made Klein once again see the grayish-white building at the bottom. This was a building that was completely different from the current style of the fourth, third, and even the second epoch. Thump! Klein's heart rapidly contracted before it expanded again. The smile he just made froze on his face. Thump! Thump! When he heard his own heartbeat, he suddenly had the common sense he had regarding the present world appear in his mind.
12 months a year, 365 days a year, has leap years. 24 hours a day, 60 minutes a day, 60 seconds a minute. It's confirmed to be a planet. There's a sun and a moon in the sky.
Badump, badump, badump. Klein's instinct prevented him from thinking any further, but deep in his heart there was still a voice.
Could it be that I've never actually transmigrated? I've always been on Earth the entire time, but I've been hanging from the door of light above the gray fog for too long, making me truly not belong to this era.
As this thought formed, many details that didn't catch his attention spewed out like a volcano in his mind.
To the easternmost front of the Sonya Sea, before entering the ruins of the battlefield of the gods, there are rotting and crumbling steel buildings around the ancient well. They appeared to be left behind by humans. The northern and southern continent are overall very similar in shape to that of North and South America. However, a large part of the isthmus that connects the two landmasses has been wiped away by some kind of power, forming the Berserk Sea with its complicated and winding sea routes. Also, Sonia Island is like the gigantic landmass in the north that drifted south. Mid-Seashore is like the expanded and connected version of the Great Lakes of North America. It's as though it suffered a strike from a massive meteor. The mountains and rivers on the northern continent have changed a lot, but the overall shape is barely recognizable. In that case, the western continent where the elves come from, and the forsaken land of the gods in the eastern continent, will correspond to Chernobyl. In the legends of treasure out at sea, there's a lost civilization called the Nuans. It sank somewhere in the Fog Sea. The Giant King's parents are humans. The Sanguine elves also seem to originate from humans. I previously had two questions. Why would Sapphira Castle grab transmigrators from Earth? Why would all of them be people from my era? This can also be explained.
In the short span of 2 to 3 seconds, it was as if lightning was constantly exploding in his mind. This caused his lips to tremble slightly, as though he was trying his best to contain the backlash of his revelation.
But the moon in this world is crimson. The constellations are somewhat different from those of Earth. I'm not an astronomy aficionado, so I can't remember clearly. However, the Emperor consumed the potions from the savant pathway. If the cosmos was completely identical, he would have discovered it a long time ago.
The opposing opinion appeared in Klein's mind. They were like a strong anchor, preventing his ship from being blown away from the port in the midst of the storm. But 1 second later, he remembered 2 lines. One sentence was a terrifying prophecy that he had read online in his previous life.
When the stars are right, chaos will rise from underground, and the great oldest one will awaken.
The other was,
Be careful of the moon.
Klein almost ignored Eamon in front of him. Even his body began to tremble.
That prophecy wasn't randomly made up? When the stars are right. So this resulted in the previous discrepancies?
He used a great deal of strength before he sighed inwardly.
Perhaps. I've never left my hometown, but I will never be able to return home.
Just as he came to this understanding and realization, the grayish-white fog silently appeared in front of him. This time, he directly stood in front of the waning forest, which corresponded to the end of the first epoch and the early stages of the second epoch. Unlike the past, the boundless gray fog in front of him was no longer empty. Deep in the fog, in a very far distance, points of shattered light were lit up. They were like lighthouses, illuminating the path of history. They led Klein forward as they traced back thousands of years, or even further. Then, he saw the resplendent bluish-black door of light. He saw transparent cocoons hanging above it and himself in a t-shirt and loose pants. An invisible wind blew past as the grayish-white fog beneath the door opened, layer by layer, revealing cities. There were tall skyscrapers with all kinds of cars parked, frozen with pedestrians that walked past. One by one, these cities were covered in grayish-white dust. Many buildings had collapsed, broken steel bars tearing out of their frames. Some of the cars had caved in, others had broken down. There were even some that had been squashed into metallic pancakes. The passers-by looked lifeless, like wax figures. Upon seeing this scene, Klein stopped and stared intently. He knew very well that
this world was Earth.
At that moment, he completely digested the Scholar of Yore potion. Suddenly, Klein's consciousness returned to the real world. He realized that his connection with Sapphira Castle had strengthened. Amidst the buzzing sounds, the resonance generated by the prayers of the Tarot Club members grew in intensity. Previously, he could use them to vaguely sense Sapphira Castle above the gray fog and see that the Klein at the Fool's Seat was trying to establish some sort of connection with the dark red warping figure that was about to take form. In an instant, he came to a realization. There was no longer a need for him to chant the incantation or take 4 steps counterclockwise. With a mere thought, his spirit body could enter Sapphira Castle, becoming one with that figure.
This was undoubtedly the best opportunity for him to escape.
He couldn't be bothered to marvel at the fact that this world was Earth. Believing that Eamon definitely didn't know of such a development, Klein immediately thought of jumping straight towards Sapphira Castle. At this moment, the corner of his eye reflected the pointy-hatted, monocled, classic mage-robed Amon curled his lips into a smile, one that spoke of endless joy. Klein's mind suddenly exploded as all his thoughts were occupied by the crazy raving from Amon.
You're right. I didn't want to steal your destiny, bearing the burden while becoming the new owner of Sapphira Castle. You're right. This was a scam that has been going on since the beginning. Rehamide. However, the core of this scam was to make you think that me giving you hope and destroying it was to break your will and make you agree to become my blessed. If I hadn't specially changed my clothes when I entered the forsaken land of the gods, as well as my accidental use of error powers, would you have been so sure that my true body was already here? Could it be possible that the god of deceit doesn't understand that changing one's image would expose many problems? Did you think that I wouldn't understand what the name Chernobyl means? I've been in the forsaken land of the gods for more than 1,000 years. I've been searching for the oldest traces of history, the ones that go far beyond the first epoch. The true goal of this journey was to give you some time and give you some historical knowledge to aid you in digesting the scholar of your potion, so that you can relax your vigilance in this area. Then, when your connection with Sapphira Castle deepens and you attempt to trigger it, I'll seize this opportunity and use a loophole to steal Sapphira Castle. The destiny shall be yours, and Sapphira Castle shall be mine.
Not only did the terrifying ravings from the King of Angels contain the sounds of Eamon's chuckle, but they also wreaked havoc on Klein's mental state. They were no weaker than Mr. Door's roar. The surface of Klein's skin began to show signs of protruding worms of spirit as he was brought to the brink of losing control. In his body, a 12-segmented worm of time burrowed out, transforming into an Amon phantom wearing a black mage robe and a matching pointy hat and crystal monocle. He had parasitized Klein at a superficial level, not to monitor his thoughts, but rather to take control of the situation at the critical moment through parasitizing him at a deeper level. He wanted to seize this opportunity. In the beginning, Eamon had used a deeper level of parasitizing with one main goal, to parasitize a worm of time at a superficial level without the saint being able to detect it. The Eamon projection turned back and gave Klein, who was unable to straighten his thoughts after being disrupted by the ravings, a look. It revealed a smile that was identical to its true body. The corners of his lips curled up slightly, carrying a look of endless joy. He turned around and used the invisible connection to leap towards Sapphira Castle above the gray fog. This was similar to the situation of him parasitizing Derek Berg and trying to use the crimson star that corresponded to the sun to infiltrate the world above the gray fog. But this time, no one was inside Sapphira Castle to purify him, to close the door, to stop Eamon. This was a spectacular act. This was the god of deceit. Chapter 1168. My Anchors. In the blink of an eye, Eamon saw the grayish-white fog and the ancient and majestic palace above. He just needed to reach out his hand and pass through the final obstacle to truly touch Sapphira Castle and directly occupy the place, and, in essence, take it away. But at that moment, a gigantic, bluish-black palm suddenly appeared above the Amon phantom, blocking him from entering Sapphira Castle. Eamon's projection subconsciously turned its head and looked in the direction of the palm. It saw the pus-covered, one-eyed giant who had long since died. Bladel, who was known as the god of glory, still didn't show any signs of life in his exaggerated vertical eye. The curse of the grayish-yellow fog kept emanating from his body. However, it was different from before. There were seemingly illusory black tubes behind his back. They extended all the way into the infinite distance, a mystery as to what they were connected to. Boom! The towering bluish-black giant instantly condensed a broadsword formed from the orange-red light of dusk. Holding it in one hand, he cleaved down at the side of the deep ravine where Eamon's body was. This youngest son of the giant king, the one who had died due to the curse, suddenly unleashed an unimaginable power after roaming aimlessly for thousands of years. The twilight sword tore through the void and jumped out from the spot where the Angel of Time, Amon, was standing. It ripped through everything around it, turning into a storm that could destroy this desolate moor. Amon didn't move and remained standing there. No matter how the orange-red sword storm raged, it didn't harm him at all. He seemed to have used some sort of error in this world again. However, in this state, Amon was no longer able to transmit his ravings into Klein's mind, allowing him to finally gain a sliver of peace. Ignoring how he was about to lose control, he regained his clarity of mind using the clear and real surroundings and the layers of prayer. Then he immediately resonated with the dark red figure sitting at the fool's seat above the gray fog, and he established a new connection. He didn't hesitate to return to Sapphira Castle. And at this moment, Amon's phantom, which was attempting to infiltrate above the gray fog, was obstructed by the bluish-black palm of the god of glory, Bledel. He wasn't able to instantly break through the titanic obstruction. The monocled King of Angels, be it his avatar or true body, opened his mouth and said a name.
Evernight.
Yes, this was help coming from the Evernight goddess, but it wasn't without reason. Although Klein lacked confidence in this matter, he had always kept it as one of his trump cards. He only believed that it might not be effective and had a very low chance of success. It could only be used as a glimmer of hope at his most desperate hour. After entering the forsaken land of the gods and obtaining some space to think on his own, he worked hard to find resources available to him that could be used. Then he recalled something, the matter of the former chief of the City of Silver. This demon hunter had attempted to switch to sequence 3 ferrymen of the death pathway, but he ended up turning into a monster inside the mausoleum he built. This anomaly was related to illusory black tubes, and such a phenomenon had been seen from the numinous sex artificial death. In other words, the mutation of the former chief of the City of Silver was very likely related to artificial death. This indirectly explained something, that for some unknown reason, those that could influence the forsaken land of the gods, other than the true creator, included artificial death, who had come to life to a certain level. And now, artificial death could be considered the Evernight goddess in some ways. Based on this reasoning, Klein suspected that the goddess could use the uniqueness of the death pathway to exert a low level of influence to some degree on certain things in the forsaken land of the gods. In addition, there were only 3 people involved in the matter regarding the former chief of the City of Silver. One of them was the current chief, Colin Iliad, the demigod elder, Waite Shermont, and shepherd elder Lovia. They were either Sequence 4 saints or an important believer of the true creator. It was impossible for them to be completely unaware that they had been parasitized by Amon. As for the only person who received feedback from the escapade, it was Derek Berg who was under the fool's watch. He wasn't one of Amon's parasites either. In other words, Amon wasn't aware of the former City of Silver chief's abnormality involving the black illusory tubes. That was key. Therefore, even if he was able to guess that the Evernight goddess had obtained the uniqueness of the death pathway, causing the god of combat to have an intense reaction, there was no way for him to know that this would bring about unforeseen developments to the forsaken land of the gods. With this knowledge in mind, Klein consciously performed certain tasks, despite not having much confidence. In the city that believed in the Phoenix, he didn't take away the remaining death pathways beyond her characteristics, hoping to leave a trail. After summoning Zarathul's historical projection, he didn't seize the opportunity to commit suicide immediately. On the one hand, he was afraid that Amon would still have the ability to stop him and affect his other arrangements, while on the other hand, he tried to use the summoning of the Servant of Concealment Ariana's projection to inform the Evernight goddess about the exact situation. After completing these 2 matters, Klein had no idea what the final outcome would be. He had mostly focused his attention on the fact that Amon's avatar had been replaced by his true body. When he arrived at his final destination and saw the roaming angel's corpse, he had just thought of something when he was distracted by Amon's introduction. It took him only until now to realize that the goddess had long gained some rudimentary control of this giant king's youngest son through the death pathway's uniqueness. She had been patiently waiting for an opportunity to use this cursed angel. and the concealment forces that filled the forsaken land of the gods helped her conceal the illusory black tubes very well. Suddenly, in the ancient palace above the gray fog, at the fool's seat situated at the end of the long, mottled table, the dark red figure that kept warping and scattering took the form of the scholarly Klein with his black hair and brown eyes. With just a thought, Klein's consciousness and spirit body had returned to Sapphira Castle. Following that, he used the close connection between his body and Sapphira Castle, together with the prayers of the Tarot Club members, to amplify the resonance effect. He then saw himself, glazed eyes, on the brink of losing control. He saw Amon's projection, which had circled around the bluish-black palm using an error. The monocled Amon raised his head, making eye contact with Klein, who was seated at the fool's seat. Klein beckoned for the sea god scepter and raised it. The entire gray fog boiled as the entirety of Sapphira Castle quaked. A vast amount of terrifying power gathered over, transforming into a torrent of lightning. The blue gems that lit up at the same time sent an illuminating light that surged down like a torrent, drowning Amon's avatars and his own body. A deep rumble of thunder echoed as the terrifying silver lightning tore everything it enveloped apart. Amon's projection disintegrated, and Klein's body was destroyed. He had finally succeeded in committing suicide. After completing this attack, Klein, who was high above the gray fog, immediately cut off the connection between Sapphira Castle and the real world, so as to prevent Amon's true body from creating any new accidents. Right on the heels of that, he began to wait for the miracle and waited for his resurrection. Beside the deep ravine, which had grayish-white buildings at the bottom, Amon's true body adjusted the crystal monocle, stealing the curse that kept Bladel existing. The bluish-black giant immediately began to rot, quickly being reduced to bones. The illusory black tubes didn't persist, and they instead shrank back into the depths of the darkness. Dressed in a pointed hat and a classic black robe, Amon stood there. He raised his head and looked into the sky silently for a few seconds, as though he was looking at Sapphira Castle through the fog of history. Finally, he pinched the crystal monocle and muttered to himself as the corners of his mouth curled up.
Interesting.
In the ancient palace, at the end of the long, mottled table, Klein sat at the seat belonging to the fool. He carefully looked down at the grayish-white fog. He discovered that the beyonder characteristics that had been destroyed with his body had unknowingly entered the historical void. It fused with the worms of spirit from the past, turning them corporeal. As long as Klein willed it from Sapphira Castle, these worms of spirit would immediately be able to escape the fog of history and reform his body in the real world. The miracle of resurrection was essentially a deeper use of one's strength from the past. Miracles happen using the past and future? Klein frowned slightly as he attempted to analyze how the miracle invoker came about. After thinking for a few seconds, he quickly pulled his attention back and attempted to revive himself in Sapphira Castle. Then he discovered a problem. His body could only be revived in the real world. Furthermore, it had to be within a certain range of his remains. As for his spirit body, it could be reborn above the gray fog. But Klein's spirit body hadn't been destroyed. It was sitting on the high-back chair of the fool. Klein's mind raced. Although he was somewhat vexed, he was in his most relaxed state over the past few days.
Obtaining help from the past works. The number of resurrections I'm using now is depleting the number I'll have after I become a miracle invoker. From the looks of it, there's only one chance now. Taisk. Amon should be guarding my corpse now. I have to think of a way to get out of this predicament. His sense of time is different from a human's. He's a very patient god of mischief. Yes, my current state can only be maintained for 3 days. After that period of time, I won't be able to borrow powers from the past to resurrect. If it really doesn't work, I'll just abandon my body and become an undead.
He finally got out of that nearly hopeless situation. He looked at the high-back chairs that had symbols light up on their backs, as well as the burgeoning and contracting dark red stars. Klein exhaled and relaxed as he leaned back into his chair. He couldn't help but reveal a smile.
These are my anchors.
Author's note: this arc has finally come to an end. The whole story's origins was when I was reading the Cthulhu myth, When I saw the line about the stars being right, I suddenly thought of this. We often say that Cthulhu will awaken soon, but what happens if Cthulhu has already awakened? For those who don't know much about Cthulhu, it doesn't matter. Just treat this name as an evil god. After all, the corresponding deities were completely reconstructed by me. Chapter 1169. Klein's Plan. The flashing, dark red glow slightly warmed Klein's heart. He felt that he wasn't that lonely, and that someone still remembered him. As the illusory, overlapping sounds of prayers became clearer and clearer, turning increasingly real, noisy, and chaotic, he realized that Sapphira Castle was summoning him, and the resonance between the two was growing stronger. After all the members of the Tarot Club had completed their prayers, Klein had a vague feeling that he could enter Sapphira Castle at any time, allowing his consciousness to manifest there instantly. However, he was still obstructed by that one last obstacle. This problem was finally resolved after he completely digested the Scholar of Yore potion. It was also because of this that he had the opportunity to return to Sapphira Castle before Amon broke past the obstruction from the god of glory, Bladel.
In just 2 short days, all the members of the Tarot Club have prayed. Generally speaking, there shouldn't be a coincidence like this. Some aren't problematic, but there are some that seem to have been affected by the goddess and will. I was lucky enough, so I naturally had a good development.
After careful thought, he realized how unreasonable certain parts were, but this was something that could be explained, and there was no need to pay too much attention to it. After changing his seating posture slightly, Klein's gaze gradually darkened. Although he felt that he might not be able to return home the moment he saw the door of light and cocoons, he still felt that his hopes were completely destroyed upon confirming that this world was his former hometown. The light of dawn was swallowed by the darkness.
Back then, using the fool that doesn't belong to this era as an honorific name might be a revelation given to me by my spiritual intuition. In the deepest part of my heart, I might have sensed something. Yes, I remember that I transmigrated while I was sleeping. But why was I wearing a t-shirt and loose pants while hanging in the cocoon?
Klein frowned slightly as he cast his gaze at the grayish-white fog under Sapphira Castle. As he searched for the reason for the fragments of light in the fog of history, he tried hard to recall every detail of that fateful night. Finally, he found the corresponding historical segment. Zhou Minggrue, who was wearing a t-shirt and loose pants, set up the luck enhancement ritual before dinner. He took 4 steps counterclockwise and recited incantations like the immortal Lord of Heaven and Earth for blessings. In his memories, nothing had happened back then, but the scene in history wasn't like this. After Zhou Minggrue finished his 4 steps and completed the ritual, his face turned pale and his eyes glazed over. Following that, he ate his meal in a daze. He read books, watched dramas, and fiddled with his phone as if he was completing a predetermined program. Finally, Zhou Minggrue came to the sink and looked at his lifeless eyes in the mirror. He brushed his teeth, washed his face, and went to bed. During this process, he didn't change out of his t-shirt and loose pants. He covered himself with the blanket and closed his eyes. Before long, an intense light and violent shaking ended the corresponding historical scene. Klein couldn't help but raise his hand and rub his temples. He gave a self-deprecating laugh.
So the idea of there not being any changes and everything being normal after the luck enhancement ceremony was simply what I concluded. In actual fact, my body had already experienced certain anomalies.
If it were in the past, he would definitely feel horrified and scared about the truth of the matter. However, after suffering from shock so many times, with his worldview nearly collapsing just moments ago, such a trivial matter was unable to generate any intense ripples in him. However, after discovering this, combined with the Emperor's transmigration, a result of buying a mysterious silver plate, as well as one of the hanging spirit bodies and the transparent cocoons actually having a cell phone on them, Klein quickly had some guesses about what had happened back then.
It should be the owner of Sapphira Castle, affecting reality, disseminating the luck enhancement ritual, mysterious silver plate, mutated cell phones, and other things. Anyone that obtains them and performs some required procedure would end up being pulled above the gray fog at some point, hanging by the door of light. This was a random selection. It didn't point to a specific target, I don't know if I'm lucky or unlucky. However, why was it named Quintessential Divination and Arcane Arts of the Qin and Han Dynasty? Was it randomly made up by the influenced humans, or was it really passed down from the Qin and Han Dynasty era? It's not that it's impossible. If the "when the stars are right" prophecy is true, and if it corresponds to the Creator, the oldest one, then he has always been in a deep slumber underground. He was like that in ancient times, a time that was far more ancient than ancient times. As for Sapphira Castle, it said that it was a manifestation of parts of his body. This isn't a sanctuary or escape pod. In the beginning, the oldest one was, on the one hand, waiting to awaken and destroy the world. On the other hand, he was trying to influence reality with a tiny amount of constant fluctuations. By disseminating the ritual and making other arrangements, wouldn't that be somewhat contradictory? That prophecy must have been made by the humans that were influenced by him.
Klein stretched out his right hand and lightly knocked on the edge of the long mottled table, stuck in a conundrum that was temporarily impossible to answer. Soon he remembered a sentence and some things. That statement was, "Whatever separates will definitely converge, and whatever converges will definitely separate." Those things were, the ancient sun god, Amen and Adam's father, deliberately separated his negative personality. Beyonders who were close to the ground or encountered some corruption would gradually form a brand new self. After reaching the moon, Emperor Rosel's personality had changed a little without him realizing it. Many of the 22 Beyonder pathways were conflicting, just like Demoness and Hunter.
Perhaps the Creator, the oldest one, was an amalgamation of contradictions, and he could only relieve this problem by sleeping.
Klein had a certain guess, but he was unable to verify it. He wasn't even sure if the oldest one, who would awaken when the stars are right, as spoken of in mythical legend in his previous life, was the creator of all things who splintered into everything in present-day myths. This required more clues and more evidence to confirm. He couldn't just rely on his own guesses and imagination. "It's not like I'm a visionary," Klein thought in a self-deprecating manner. He then cast his gaze upwards. It was almost comprised solely of gray nothingness there, with some grayish-white clouds floating there.
There are still many things I need to confirm. For example, is that so-called Chernobyl a sanctuary created by humans after the awakening of the oldest one? Or did the Beyonder characteristics of the 22 Beyonder pathways really originate from the oldest one? Another would be the positions of the constellations. Is it actually normal, or is it abnormal now? Does the 1368 apocalypse correspond to the moment when the stars are right? And finally, the origins of the first blasphemy slate and what exactly is on the moon.
Thinking of this, Klein suddenly stopped tapping his fingers and softly said,
For example, the hometown of the elves, the legendary Western continent, whether it exists or not, and why can't anyone go there?
The answer to his question was a long period of silence. He slowly leaned back and rested his arms on the armrest. After a few minutes, Klein closed his eyes and had an idea. Or rather, he decided. After he successfully revived, he planned on staying in the Forsaken Land of the Gods for some time to seek out some questions. Just as Emperor Rosel had said, many of the answers were in the Forsaken Land of the Gods. Blasphemer Amen had wandered here for more than 1,000 years to explore the history that surpassed the first epoch. Furthermore, if he kept heading east in the Forsaken Land of the Gods, he might reach the legendary Western continent. Klein cast his gaze outside the ancient palace as he looked into the distance. To him, staying in the Forsaken Land of the Gods for some time was also a type of strategy. At the very least, this would attract the attention of Amen, making him not need to mobilize his avatars in the outside world to search for Gehrman Sparrow in Lowen or Backland. That would bring great danger to the people that he knew.
Thankfully, the avatars of Amon, who knew that I'm soft-hearted, had been wiped out. The corresponding information was also not propagated because of the existence of concealment. If not for that, Amen might end up directly using the lives of Benson, Melissa, Leonard, and Miss Justice to threaten me. I don't even dare to think of the outcome. Heh, the King of Yellow and Black who wields good luck has finally shown its powers. Phew, even if I want to leave the Forsaken Land of the Gods, I don't have a solution now. I have to barge into the place where the dark angel is sleeping.
Klein shook his head and felt that even if he could resurrect, he would be facing all kinds of dangers.
No matter how he thought about it, a scholar of yore wouldn't last long if he were tracked by a king of angels.
The key to the matter was that the Evernight goddess was still digesting the uniqueness of the death pathway. She could only spare a limited amount of power for infiltrating the forsaken land of the gods. Once the Angel of Time, who wielded the authority of error, was prepared, it was nearly impossible to accomplish what had happened today.
On the one hand, I have to seek help from other possible existences. When I successfully revive, I will attempt to use my marionette to recite the honorific name of the Lord of Storms, Eternal Blazing Sun, and the God of Knowledge and Wisdom. Let's see if they have any means to descend into the forsaken land of the gods. They had fed on the ancient sun god back then, so they definitely do not wish for Aemon to obtain Sapphire Castle. On the other hand, since the Scholar of Yore's potion has been completely digested, I'll have to consider becoming a miracle invoker. As long as I have an angel status and become a complete mythical creature, my situation will be much better. At the very least, I'll be able to withstand a wave of Aemon's ravings when facing his true body.
Klein decided to use the medium to spy on the terrifying maggot cluster on the main peak of the Hornasus mountain range once his spirit body recovered. From there, he could obtain the knowledge corresponding to a miracle invoker.
It was highly likely that it was the half-fool of the Antigonus family.
After considering his future plans, he looked around and answered the crimson stars one at a time.
The tarot gathering will proceed as usual today.
He wanted to see if Ma'am Hermit, Mr. Hanged Man, and the others could provide him with inspiration and allow him to be revived far away from Aemon. Of course, it was necessary to use an ingenious excuse. After responding, the world above the gray fog became extremely quiet again. Klein sat at the seat of the Fool, temporarily with nowhere to go. After a moment of silence, he leaned forward slightly and used his right hand to support his head, looking straight ahead. On the long, mottled table, a variety of delicacies and exquisite candles appeared. As for the high-backed chairs around it, they became even closer in style to the current times. One figure after another appeared. One of them was an elderly man with a loud voice and silver strands in his black hair. Another was a woman who was nearly 50 years old. She had an Asian face with short hair that only reached her ears. Some of them were young men who were playing with their phones and enjoying the sumptuous food, while others were young ladies who were laughing and joking. Behind them, new figures appeared one after another. It was the gray-eyed Dun with a receding hairline, and Daly with her blue eyeshadow and blush. With a smile on their faces, they surrounded the long, warm table surrounded by candlelight above the grayish-white fog. They chatted happily and commented on the delicacies from time to time. Klein maintained his expression and posture as he propped his hand on the side of his face and silently watched this scene in stillness for an extended period of time. Chapter 1170, Ritual, Backland, North Borough. Leonard, who had just arranged a mission for his team, saw the boundless gray fog and heard Mr. Fool's response, "Via." He let out a long sigh of relief and said in a low voice,
"Seems like there are no more problems."
Since Mr. Fool was able to provide feedback as per normal and convene the tarot gathering, it meant that he had already won the battle against Aemon. This way, Klein was likely able to escape from his predicament. In Leonard's mind, Pallas Zoroast's slightly aged voice scoffed.
"Don't count your chickens until they've hatched. After you enter Sapphire Castle, observe if the fool is wearing a monocle on his right eye."
Are you saying that the present fool might be Aemon in disguise?
Leonard's eyelids twitched as he hurriedly asked. Pallas sighed and said,
"You can't eliminate this possibility. Aemon can really do such a thing."
I will take note.
Leonard's relaxed state of mind instantly tensed up again. On the future, in the Sonia Sea.
Mr. Fool actually responded after so much time. Does this mean that the world Gehrman Sparrow's disappearance had something to do with his plan? I can't be sure. Perhaps Mr. Fool's lack of response during this period of time was to save Gehrman Sparrow. And now he has succeeded? He didn't directly mention this matter. He is planning to let the world tell the story at the tarot gathering?
After hearing Mr. Fool's voice, many thoughts instantly flashed across Catleya's mind. From Queen Mystic's letter, she suspected that George III's death was due to Mr. Fool's interference. The disappearance of the World Gehrman Sparrow was also an extension of this matter. Catleya's first reaction was to write to Queen Mystic Bernadette and tell her that Gehrman Sparrow has been found. However, after some thought, she suppressed her urge and she prepared to participate in the afternoon's gathering. She wanted to know the details and figure out what she could and couldn't say before sending Queen Mystic feedback. Regardless, it seems like the matter has been resolved. The Admiral of Stars exhaled and sat by the window in peace as she took in the blue sky. In the periphery of a primitive forest on Sonia Island, Alger Wilson stood on a thin tree branch, looking at the port and the blue skies not far away. The strong winds around him swirled without dispersing as they affected the trees nearby. As the illusory grayish-white fog appeared, Algier was first delighted before he felt a little terrified.
Mr. Fool only responded after quite some time. This means that his previous state was indeed a little abnormal. However, he has already recovered. He didn't respond to my loan request regarding the sun's unshadowed crucifix. He discovered my test and discovered a hint of my hidden thoughts. I can't do such things again in the future. Mr. Fool has only issued a simple warning this time. He might punish me directly next time. Thou shalt not test God. Thou shalt not test God.
As his thoughts raced, Alger lowered his head and piously said,
Thank you for your kindness and forgiveness.
Backland, inside the Hall family's luxurious villa.
Mr. Fool didn't pass on my question to Mr. World. Is this because the tarot gathering will proceed as normal in the afternoon, and there will be time for us to communicate? Generally speaking, Mr. Fool's reply is very timely. It was more than 15 minutes this time. He was handling other matters? Very important matters? Is it related to George III's death?
Audrey realized certain problems from the delay in the response. Regardless, a 15-minute delay wasn't too serious a problem. Audrey quickly retracted her thoughts and felt much better.
I'll know the truth from Mr. World later. I hope that this incident won't have any more serious consequences, other than a full-scale war. At the moment, war is already unavoidable.
Northborough in Backland, beneath St. Samuel Cathedral.
Mr. Fool didn't say that he would help me.
Emlyn White held a cup of red liquid and frowned slightly. He then interpreted the symbolic meaning of the response from another angle.
Mr. Fool specifically emphasized that the tarot gathering will proceed as normal in the afternoon. He wants to tell me that the opportunity to escape from the predicament lies with a member? Could it be the star? In short, I should be able to leave this week.
Emlyn had been taken into protective custody and kept behind St. Samuel Church's Channis Gate, so no matter what happened in the outskirts of Backland, it was unlikely for it to affect him. Furthermore, it was impossible for him to suddenly escape from prison and head to places like the Blood Emperor ruins. Therefore, when Klein hinted to the other members last week, he hadn't been involved. In the Berg household in the City of Silver, upon hearing Mr. Fool's response, Derek jumped up from bed. The excitement from his face was overflowing.
Mr. Fool hasn't disappeared. Mr. Fool hasn't forsaken the City of Silver like the Creator did.
He paced back and forth a few times, feeling the urge to immediately rush out of the room and head to the Twin Towers where he could tell the chief the good news. However, having had more than a year to mature, those experiences had left a clear mark on him. Finally, he calmed down and decided to attend the tarot gathering and obtain the promise of receiving the blessings before he sought the chief again.
Perhaps the lack of response during this period of time was a test of me, the chief, and the City of Silver, one set by Mr. Fool. He wanted to see if we would rapidly lean towards the fallen Creator.
It was unknown when Derek's thought processes had a hint of the hanged man's colorful thoughts. Of course, he didn't have any other thoughts because of this. From what he knew, it was very normal for deities to test their believers. Back then, the Creator had left behind many similar legends. Despite being done with his contemplation, Derek still couldn't sit still, and he continued pacing back and forth in his room. He had never felt such anticipation towards the tarot gathering in the afternoon. In the city of Silver, in the forsaken land of the gods, the afternoon was a relatively abstract concept. As there weren't enough labels to confirm the time, they could only use the frequency of the lightning to define day and night, without going into any finer details. Backland Eastborough, inside a 2-bedroom rental apartment.
Ha.
After receiving Mr. Fool's response, Forrest couldn't help but laugh out loud. As a best-selling author, she had a rich imagination. Before Mr. Fool responded, she had already come up with one terrifying story after another. Mr. Fool had exchanged his death for George III's failure. Mr. Fool's ploy was discovered by the deities and was besieged. Mr. Fool's old injuries relapsed, and he fell into a deep sleep. Without his blessings, the world Gehrman Sparrow was being pursued by his enemies. These stories didn't develop in the same way, but the end was very similar. Fors would once again succumb to the full moon's ravings, eventually losing control and becoming a monster. Phew. Fors exhaled and said to Shio with a beaming smile,
I just realized today that Mr. Fool is the most important man in my heart. A him.
More importantly, you have to become a demigod as soon as possible and completely escape the curse of the full moon.
Shio replied seriously. After joining the Tarot Club, she had learned of her friend's true situation.
Yeah.
Fors nodded and said with a smile,
In short, I need to drink a glass of wine to celebrate.
Above the gray fog inside Saphira Castle, after calming down, Klein used cogitation to restore his spirit-body state.
When I first learned cogitation, I was required to imagine something that doesn't exist in this world so as to replace what's on my mind. That way, I can truly enter cogitation. At that time, my first reaction was to outline an intercontinental missile from Earth, but I didn't succeed. Heh, I didn't think too much about it back then. Now, in hindsight, this might have already spelled certain problems. It's not something that doesn't exist in the world, but one that has been snuffed out in the fog of history.
Klein rubbed his temples and naturally recalled a matter of the past. He immediately focused his mind and planned on obtaining the Miracle Invoker potion formula before the Tarot Club. At that moment, Eamon was patiently guarding the spot where he had died. He could only stay in Saphira Castle, so there was nothing else he could do. After some consideration, he grasped towards the exterior of the ancient palace and pulled an item from the gray fog's historical void. It was a black notebook bound with a hard paper cover, the Antigonus family's notebook.
Sure enough, it's not a manifestation of the uniqueness. It's just that there are some powers left behind by the half-fool of the Antigonus family.
Klein sighed and threw the notebook onto the long bronze table in front of him. This was because the content of the notebook might be problematic. He didn't intend to decipher the formula of the Sequence 2 Miracle Invoker through it. He was only using it as a medium for divination. Following that, Klein conjured a pen and paper and wrote a divination statement. The original owner of this notebook. Putting down the pen, he picked up the paper and notebook, leaned back in his chair, and repeated the words he had just written. After repeating it 7 times, he entered a hazy dream. He saw a mountain peak that reached into the clouds. At the top of the mountain, there was a dilapidated, towering palace that was separated from reality. In the palace, there were many places covered with moss and weeds. At the very end of the hall was a huge stone chair. Its surface was inlaid with dull gemstones and gold. In the middle, countless transparent maggots were huddled into a cluster as they slowly squirmed and grew, extending out like slippery tentacles covered in patterns. Unlike before, this time, Klein saw the monster directly and clearly saw his actual appearance. The palace above the gray fog suddenly began to shake violently, and Klein's figure was hoisted up in midair. In the next second, his spirit body collapsed into numerous squirming worms of spirit that crawled all over the ground. Saphira Castle immediately quaked, and everything returned to its original state. Klein's spirit body took form once again. He sat at the fool's seat and rubbed his temples before saying, with a wry smile,
It really is the half-fool with the uniqueness.
After he muttered to himself, Klein did a slight recollection before picking up the pen and began to write down the knowledge he had obtained from prying into the secrets of the mythical creature. Sequence 2, Miracle Invoker. Main ingredients: 1 heart of the dark demonic wolf, god of wishes, or the beyonder characteristic of another miracle invoker. Supplementary ingredients: 300 milliliters of dark demonic wolf's blood, 1 worm of time, 1 worm of star. Advancement ritual: return a piece of history that has been left behind to the present era.